My son raised his right hand in a rented conference room in San Antonio, swore to tell the truth, and then told a room full of strangers that his own mother had been confused at the end and that his own father had taken advantage of a dying woman. I sat 6 feet away with a plain manila envelope under my hand, and I did not say a word because everything I needed to say was already inside it. What was in that envelope had been waiting in the dark for 2 years. My son had no idea it existed. His lawyer had no idea it existed. And the moment it came out, one of the people sitting at that table was going to stand up and walk out of his life for good. But I am getting ahead of myself. My name is Vernon Cutler. Folks have called me Vern since before Eisenhower left office. I am 77 years old, and I live in the hill country of Texas, in a little limestone town called Cypress Bend, about 20 minutes outside of Kerrville, where the cedars hold the ridgelines and the Guadalupe runs green and slow below the bluffs. I spent 38 years as a lineman for the electric cooperative out here. Ice storms, lightning strikes, floods. If your lights came back on some awful night between Nixon and the second Bush, there is a fair chance an old boy like me was up a pole in the weather getting them on. And before we go one step further, do me a small kindness. Tell me down in the comments which state your porch sits in tonight. I read every one of them with my morning coffee, and it does an old man good to know just how far this kitchen table reaches. Now, to understand how my only son came to put his hand on a Bible and speak against his own mother, I have to take you back to the week we buried her. My Dottie, Dorothy Cutler. She taught 3rd grade at Cypress Bend Elementary for 31 years, which means half this county learned to carry the one and spell Wednesday in her classroom. She had a voice that never needed raising and a red pen she wore down to a nub every single school year. Her heart had been failing for a long while. Congestive heart failure is a slow thief. It does not kick the door in. It comes up the porch steps one at a time over years and takes a little more of your breath each visit. We had time to see it coming. I thought that meant we had no surprises left between us. I was wrong about that in a way I am still learning the size of. The funeral was on a Tuesday morning at the First Baptist Church, the same sanctuary where we were married in the spring of 1972. Half the town came. Grown men I remembered as 7-year-olds stood in line to tell me what Mrs. Cutler had done for them. The choir sang, "In the Garden," because she had asked for it, and I stood there in my one good suit and held the hand of my daughter, and I got through it the way a man gets through weather. You lean into it, you keep your footing. You wait for it to pass. It was the mornings after that nearly took me down. 45 years of marriage builds a machine out of 2 people. Every morning of my working life, Dottie was up before me. She would put the coffee on the stove, and she would fill my old green thermos, a dented steel Stanley I bought at the hardware store the same month I hired on at the cooperative. That thermos rode in my truck through every storm season the hill country could invent. The paint is chipped down to bare metal on one side, where it slid across the bench seat for 4 decades. She filled it the morning I retired too, and every deer season and fishing trip after, like the job never really ended. It was still sitting on the kitchen counter, the week she died, with the last coffee ring she ever left drying inside it like a watermark on a creek rock. I could not bring myself to wash it. I want to be honest with you about how a man's mind works in a season like that. I could stand at her graveside and hold myself together like a soldier, but I could not run tap water into that thermos. Some mornings, I would just pick it up, feel how light it was, and set it back down. I tell you about the thermos now because it matters later. Most of the things that saved me that summer looked, at first, like small and ordinary things. That is the first lesson of this story, and it will not be the last one. Because 5 days after we lowered the finest woman I ever knew into the ground of the Garden of Memory Cemetery, while her flowers were still standing up straight on the fresh dirt, my son Wade came up my porch steps with a folder under his arm, a fresh haircut, and a look on his face that I had seen before. I just had never seen it aimed at me. Before I open that folder for you, you need to know who was in the house behind me. Dottie and I raised 2 children. Wade came first in 1974, and our daughter Roberta came along 3 years behind him. Nobody has called her Roberta since she was a baby. Her granddaddy took one look at her, tiny and bright-eyed and singing to herself before she could talk, and said, "Well, that one is a little bird." So she's been Birdie for 49 years. When Birdie was 19, coming home from a church retreat, a truck ran a stop sign out on the ranch road and hit the car she was riding in. She was in a hospital in San Antonio for 11 weeks. The head injury took some things from her and left other things alone, and the doctors never could draw us a clean map of which was which. What I can tell you is what she is like at 49. She remembers every birthday in this family and half the birthdays in our church. She keeps her own room squared away better than I keep the whole rest of the house. She works 3 mornings a week bagging groceries at Klein's Market in town, and she has never once been late. And every morning of her life, rain or shine, she walks out to the fence post by the garden, reads the rain gauge, and writes the number down in a spiral notebook. She has filled more of those notebooks than I can count. If you want to know what the weather did in Cypress Bend on any day in the last 20 years, you do not need the almanac. You need Birdie. She cannot manage money, and she cannot always tell when a person is lying to her, and those two facts together are why her mother worried about her every day for 30 years. Birdie gets a small check each month from the government, and her doctoring is covered the same way, and there are rules about all of it that I confess I never paid enough attention to while my wife was alive. Dottie handled it. Dottie handled everything on paper in this family, the same way I handled everything on a pole. That was the deal we struck young, and never had a reason to change. Then there was Wade. Wah! I want to be fair to my son because this story is hard enough on him without his daddy piling on. Wade was a good boy. He could sell anything to anybody by the time he was in Little League, and I used to brag on that. He went down to San Antonio after high school and eventually built himself a swimming pool business. Installation, decks, the whole show. For a good stretch there, he was flying. Big house on the north side, a new truck every other year, trips to the coast. When the money was easy, Wade was easy. He would roll in at Christmas with presents too big to wrap and stories that got better every telling, and his mother would laugh and shake her head and love him with the whole of her heart. But the last few years, the calls home had changed. Interest rates went up, and folks quit building pools about as fast as they quit anything. I did not know the particulars then. I knew the sound. 38 years on storm calls teaches you to hear trouble in a line before you can see it. A transformer that is fixing to fail has a hum to it, just a shade off of healthy, and a man carrying debt he cannot say out loud gets a voice just like that. The last time Wade visited before his mother passed, he spent half the visit on the phone in the yard, walking tight little circles in the grass. Dottie stood at the kitchen window watching him with a stillness I did not understand at the time. I understand it now. She was not watching her son pace. She was reading a gauge, same as Birdie reads hers, and writing the number down somewhere I could not see. Wade cried at the funeral. I want that said plain, because it was true. Whatever came later, the boy standing at that casket hurt like a son. His wife Deanna stood beside him with their 2 teenage boys, and my family filled a whole pew, and for 1 hour, we were only what we looked like. Grieving people who belonged to each other. 5 days later, he came up the porch steps with that folder. He had on a golf shirt and good boots, and he had gotten a haircut, and that was the first thing that sat wrong with me. There is nothing in this world wrong with a man getting a haircut. But there is a kind of tidy a man makes himself when he is fixing to ask for something, and a father knows it on sight because he watched it walk toward him at 16 wanting the car keys. Dad, Wade said, we need to talk about month-over-month's papers. He set the folder on my kitchen table, right next to her thermos, and squared its edges with 2 fingers. Before things get messy, he said. Son, I said, your mother has been gone 5 days. What in the world is fixing to get messy? He smiled at me the way you smile at a customer, and he opened the folder, and right then, though I could not have told you why, I heard it, that hum in the line, just a shade off of healthy. What was in the folder looked reasonable. That is the part I most need the younger folks listening to understand. Wickedness almost never comes up your porch steps looking wicked. It comes looking reasonable and organized and concerned about you. There was a form on top from the life insurance company, the outfit that carried the policy Dottie had paid on since Ronald Reagan's first term. A claim form, Wade called it. He had already filled in most of the blanks. There was a pamphlet under that, glossy paper with a photograph of a long brick building under live oaks and smiling folks in matching shirts. A residence, they called it. A group home for adults like Birdie, 2 hours away outside Austin. And under that was a sheet Wade had typed up himself, which he called a family agreement, saying that for simplicity, the insurance proceeds would be handled by Wade Cutler as the family member best suited to manage financial matters for the benefit of all concerned. For the benefit of all concerned. I have thought about that phrase for a year now. It is a phrase with no people in it. He talked for a long time, and he was good. He was always good. He said this old house was too much for a man my age, and that was not entirely a lie. He said Birdie deserved professional folks looking after her future, and that was not entirely a lie either. The best salesmen never handle anything but the truth. They just arrange it the way a man arranges a hand of cards. He said if we sold the house while the market was up and let him put the insurance money to work through his business, the whole family would be set. He said month over month would have wanted it simple, Dad. Sign the claim, sign the agreement, and let me carry this weight for you. And here is where I have to tell you something about the trade I gave 38 years to. Electricity is the honestest thing God ever let man play with. It does not scheme, and it does not flatter. It wants one thing, which is the shortest road home to the ground, and it will take that road every time, straight to anything and anybody standing on it. Wire never lies to you, but a wire will kill you in half a heartbeat if you assume anything about it. So the cooperative pounded one rule into us until it was down in our bones, deeper than our own names. You treat every line as live until you have grounded it yourself. Your own hands, your own clamps, your own eyes on the connection, not because you think anybody is lying, but because being sure is a job you are not allowed to hand to another man. I looked at my son's folder, laid out neat next to Dottie's thermos, and every one of those 38 years stood up inside me at once and said, real quiet, this line is live. So I did not argue with him. I closed the folder and I slid it back across the table, gentle as I could, and I said, son, I am not signing anything this week. Your mother kept a lawyer in Kerrville for her papers. I will let that office look everything over first, and then we will see where we are. You would have thought I slapped him. He kept his voice level, but his neck went red, and his fingers started drumming the tabletop, and he said, Dad, lawyers just slow things down and skim off the top. This is family business. And I said, that is right. It is family business. And half of this family is a 49-year-old woman reading a rain gauge in the backyard right now, and I will be sure for her sake, not just mine. And then my son said the thing that I could not hear for the rest of the summer. He stood up, and he gathered his folder, and at the screen door he turned around and said, you know what? Do whatever you want with the house, but that policy money, that was always coming to me. Month over month knew what I was owed. Owed. Not left, not given. Owed. I sat at that table a long while after his truck pulled out, listening to the ice maker and the clock, and I will confess to you the thought I sat there with, because this story is no good to anybody if I dress myself up in it. My first thought was not suspicion of my son. It was doubt of myself. Grief will do that. I thought, maybe he is right. Maybe I am an old man in a big house being stubborn about paperwork because paperwork was always her country, not mine. I did not even rightly know what that policy said. I thought I remembered from years back that it named me first and Wade after me. I had not laid eyes on it in a decade. But being sure is a job you are not allowed to hand to another man. So the next morning, I did the only thing I knew to do, which was to start walking the line, pole by pole, and the first pole was a phone call to the one man in town who had seen more of the week of my wife's death than I had. That call is where this story truly starts. Because Gordon Pruitt had been waiting 3 days for me to call him, holding a piece of information he did not know how to bring to a grieving man's door. Gordon Pruitt has run the funeral home in Cypress Bend for going on 30 years, and he is a deacon at First Baptist besides. He buried my mother and my father, and now my wife. When a man has stood with you at 3 gravesides, you can hear things in his hello. I had called about a small billing matter, or told myself I had. Gordon answered the phone and there was a pause, just a beat too long, and then he said, Vern, I am glad you called. I have been chewing on whether to come see you. Can you drink a cup of coffee with me this morning, not at the office? So an hour later, we were in a back booth at the Bluebonnet Cafe on Main, 2 old men with our hats in the seat beside us, and Gordon turned his cup around in circles for a minute before he got to it. Vern, he said, I do not want to step where I do not belong. But something happened during the arrangements that you were not in the room for, and it has not sat right with me since. You will remember, he said, that Wade handled a good part of the arranging, and I remembered. I had been grateful for it. Half the county had watched me pick out a casket with my hand shaking, and my strong son had stepped up and carried it. What I had not seen was the afternoon in Gordon's office when the bill came due, because Wade, it turned out, had upgraded near everything after I went home. The casket, the vault, the flowers, the whole package, another $11,000 in change on top of what I had signed for. And when Gordon presented the total, Wade did not reach for a checkbook. He asked Gordon a question. He asked whether the funeral home took assignments. Now, I did not know that word then, so let me hand it to you the way Gordon handed it to me. When a family cannot pay for a funeral out of pocket, there is a lawful, ordinary arrangement where the funeral home gets paid straight out of the life insurance, off the top, before the family sees a dime. The beneficiary signs a paper assigning that much of the money over. It happens every week everywhere in this country, and there is no shame in it. But here is the thing about it. Only the beneficiary can sign it. The money belongs to whoever is named on that policy, and nobody else's signature is worth the ink. So Gordon's office did what they always do. They got the policy number off Wade and called the insurance company to verify the beneficiary before writing anything up. And Gordon looked at me across that booth and he lowered his voice and he said, Vern, they would not take his signature. The company would not say much because they will only talk particulars with the beneficiary of record, but they said enough. Wade Cutler is not the beneficiary of that policy. And son, the way that boy's face changed when I told him, I have been doing this work 30 years, Vern. I have seen every kind of grief there is. That was not grief. He made me promise not to trouble you with it, said he did not want his daddy worried over a clerical mix-up. And then he paid the difference on a credit card that took him 3 tries to find one that would go through. I drove home from the Bluebonnet slower than I needed to, trying to fit the pieces together and not liking any picture they made. Wade had filled out that claim form at my kitchen table smooth as glass, wanting my signature on his family agreement, and the whole time he already knew the company had turned his signature away, which meant the folder was never about helping me. The folder was about finding out what he was not being told and getting downstream of the money before it moved. But if the policy did not name Wade, and near as anyone could tell it did not name me either, then who in this world had my Dottie left that money to? The answer was sitting in my mailbox when I got home. An envelope from the insurance company, addressed to me, not a check. A letter, careful and correct, saying they had received a claim inquiry on the policy of Dorothy Cutler, and that the matter was under review, and inviting the parties with an interest to contact them. Now, I want to put one plain piece of advice in your pocket right here, and it comes straight from my years of watching scams work on retired folks. When money is in motion, you call the number printed on the letter from the institution itself, not a number your nephew gives you. Not a number off the internet, the number on the letter. So that is what I did, sitting at the kitchen table with Dottie's thermos in front of me like a witness. A polite young woman looked up the policy, and she said, "Sir, I am sorry, but I can only discuss beneficiary particulars with the beneficiary or their representative." I said, "Ma'am, I understand. I was her husband of 45 years. Can you at least tell me whether I need to be talking to some other member of my family?" And there was a small silence, keys clicking, and then she said the sentence that stood the hair up on my arms. "Mr. Cutler, the beneficiary of record on this policy, is not a person at all. Not a person at all." I must have said it back to her because she gently suggested that if I had questions, the family's attorney of record might be the place to start. And did I have a pen? I did not need a pen because the name she was looking at was a law office in Kerrville, and I had been paying no attention for 2 years to how often that office turned up in my own kitchen, on the wall calendar by the icebox, in Dottie's round schoolteacher hand, going back through 2 calendars I had never thrown away. Adela Fuentes, 10:30. Adela Fuentes, 2 o'clock. I had thought it was about our wills, the plain ones we signed years back, or about Bertie's benefit paperwork, which Dottie renewed the way other folks renew a fishing license. My wife never had a single one of those appointments from me. She just let me believe they were routine. And I let myself believe it because paper was her country, and I was glad to be a visitor there. 2 days later, I sat in a straight-back chair in a small office above the title company in Kerrville, and a woman about my daughter-in-law's age, sharp-eyed and kind, folded her hands in a file as thick as a phone book and told me what my wife had built. 2 years back, about the time her doctor started saying the word hospice in the future tense, Dorothy Cutler had come to that office alone. She drove herself, Miss Fuentes made a point of telling me later, and you will learn why that mattered. And she had that office draw up a trust. Not the kind rich folks in Dallas have. A particular, humble kind, built for one purpose. The lawyers call it a special needs trust or a supplemental needs trust. Dottie called it something better. Miss Fuentes showed me the front page, and printed there was the name my wife gave it. The Bertie Fund. Here's what it does, in kitchen words, the way it was explained to me. Bertie's monthly check from the government and the medical coverage that keeps her alive both come with a hard rule. If a person like Bertie ever has too much money sitting in her own name, even one big, well-meant gift, the checks stop and the coverage stops, and they do not start again until the money is spent down to nothing. Folks learn this the worst way all the time. A grandmother leaves a granddaughter $40,000 or $50,000 straight out, in love, and that love knocks the girl off her benefits and burns itself to ash inside 2 years. And then she is worse off than if nobody had left her a nickel. But money left to a proper trust for her benefit, with the trustee holding the checkbook, does not sit in her name. It can buy her eyeglasses and dental work and a decent mattress and a bus ticket and hearing aids and 100 dignities the government checks will never cover, for the rest of her life, without ever knocking over the benefits underneath her. That is not a loophole. That is the law working exactly the way it was written to work for exactly people like my daughter. And the trustee my wife chose was not me, 77 years old with a lineman's knees, and it surely was not Wade. It was the trust department of the bank in Kerrville, folks whose whole job is to answer to a judge for every dollar, with instructions from Dottie specific enough to make me laugh out loud once and cry twice. And the life insurance policy she had fed for over 40 years. the one worth just shy of $200,000 with the additions it had grown, no longer named me first and Wade second, the way it had since the year we took the policy out. 2 years ago, she had signed the company's own change form in that office and made the Birdie Fund the beneficiary of every cent. Life insurance money, Miss Fuentes explained, does not pass through a will. It does not wait on a courthouse. It goes to whoever is named on the beneficiary form, straight as water downhill, and a will from 1980-something has no more say over it than a grocery list. The form is the whole ballgame. Which is why, she said, watching me careful over her glasses, the company was already asking questions. Because your son's lawyer sent them a letter yesterday. Wade had not waited to grieve, and he had not waited for me. He had hired a lawyer in San Antonio and formally contested the beneficiary change, and the grounds, the words his lawyer put on paper about my Dottie, I am going to say them to you, slow, because they are the reason this story goes where it goes. The letter said that Dorothy Cutler at the time of the change was elderly, gravely ill, and cognitively diminished. And it said the change was procured through the undue influence of a family member with daily control over her affairs and finances. Daily control over her affairs. That was me. My son was not just reaching for his sister's safety net. He was telling an insurance company on the record that his mother died a confused old woman and that his father twisted her dying hand into signing it. The company did what companies do when family fights over a beneficiary. It froze the money and settled in to let the parties sort it out in an office or in front of a judge. And the news of the fight did what news does in a town of 1,100 people. It got to Churchby. I have taken some hits in my time. I have been knocked off a ladder by a surge that crossed where no surge had any business crossing. But the middle of that July was the lowest ground I have ever stood on. Wade would not answer my calls, and then he answered one, and I wished he had not. He was all lawyer now. He said, Dad, do not take this personal. It is just process. He said his lawyer said the change smelled bad, an old woman with a failing heart cutting out her own son 3 days after a hospital stay. He said, and his voice went thin and mean in a way I did not recognize. Everybody knows you managed her. You drove her everywhere. You stood over that woman her whole life. I drove her everywhere. Son, I drove her everywhere because I loved her and her ankles swelled. And the town, Lord bless it and forgive it, the town talked. A fight over a dead schoolteacher's insurance is the best story to hit a small town since the water tower got painted wrong. At church, conversations went quiet, a half-second late when I walked up. Kindness kept arriving, casseroles kept arriving, but I could feel the county doing arithmetic behind my back. Some of it, I knew, came out in Wade's favor. He is charming and he is broke, and pity runs downhill toward charm. An old man alone in a paid-off house does not look like the victim of anything. He just looks stubborn. The worst of it was Birdie, because there is no hiding weather from a woman who has written it down every morning for 20 years. She stood in the kitchen one evening drying the same plate long past dry and said, Daddy, why is Wade mad at us? And I said, he is not mad at you, honey. He is scared. And scared and mad wear the same jacket. She thought about that the way she thinks all the way through, and then she said, is he going to make me leave the house? And I had to stand there and hear my own heartbeat while I figured out how to answer. Because the truthful answer was, not while I am alive. And we both knew what the second half of that sentence was. That Sunday evening, I drove out to the Garden of Memories alone and stood at the fresh stone with my hat in my hands, and I talked to my wife like a foolish old man. And I do not care who thinks it foolish. I said, Dottie, I know you saw something I did not. You changed that paper for a reason and you did not tell me. And girl, I need the reason. Because our son is putting your name in letters that call you feeble, and I am too far behind to fight him right. And standing there, I remembered the window. Dottie at the kitchen window watching Wade pace his little circles in the yard, still as a heron, reading a gauge, writing the number down somewhere I could not see. Somewhere. My wife was a school teacher for 31 years. School teachers do not keep secrets in safes. They keep records. Now, if you have ridden with me this far, do this one thing before the next part, because the next part is the reason I am telling this story at all. If you have a family and a little property and people you love who did not all turn out the same, go on and subscribe to this channel, because folks like us trade these lessons or we lose them. And what I found that night in a cardboard box that smelled like chalk dust is a lesson I would have paid half my pension to learn 1 year sooner. Her classroom things had come home in boxes when she retired, and they had sat in the sewing room closet ever since. On the top of the third box, under her flag stand and a coffee mug full of red pens, were her grade books. Old-fashioned green cloth grade books, one a year, going back decades. Except the last 3 were not full of children's names. They were full of Wade. Whoa! Dated entries. In the round hand half this county would know at 20 feet. The date, 4 years back, when Wade called from San Antonio needing $40,000 to keep his crews paid, and she sent it out of her teacher retirement money and the note she made of his promise to pay it back inside 2 years. The dates of every payment he ever made after. There were 4 of them, getting smaller, like footsteps walking away. The date he called needing 30 more, and she told him no for the first time in his life, and the entry under it, which I will carry to my grave. He hung up on me. First time since college, my fault as much as his. We taught him charm works on everything, and now money is the only word he knows in his own language. Page after page, the gauge readings of a coming storm, written down by the calmest weather watcher I ever knew. And paper clipped inside the back cover of the last grade book, in a plain envelope with my name on it, was a letter. Not a legal letter, a wife letter. I have read it more times than I have read anything but scripture, and near the end of it she wrote the sentence that took the next 3 months and set them in order. Vern, do not fight him with your temper, and do not fight him with your grief. Fight him with paper. I left you plenty. Fight him with paper. I left you plenty. She had, too. More than I knew that night, holding a grade book under the sewing room light. It took Miss Fuentes and me most of a week to understand the whole of what Dorothy Cutler had quietly built while I was out watering tomatoes and thinking we had no surprises left. Start with the morning, she changed the beneficiary. My wife had not just signed a form. She had built that signature a foundation. That morning, before her appointment at the law office, she had gone to see Dr. Kwan, her regular doctor of 18 years, and she had asked him, plain as ordering breakfast, to give her a good going-over and write down what he found about her mind. Not because anyone had asked, because she already knew somebody someday might. And Dr. Kwan had written a letter, dated that same morning, saying Dorothy Cutler was alert, oriented, sharp of memory and judgment, and entirely capable of managing her own affairs. The lawyers call that a contemporaneous capacity evaluation. Dottie, in her letter to me, called it wearing a belt and suspenders both when the trousers matter. Then she had driven herself, alone, the 20 minutes to Kerrville. That mattered, Miss Fuentes told me, because the first thing a lawyer looks at in an undue influence fight is who brought the person to the office and who sat in the room. Nobody brought her. Nobody sat in the room but her own lawyer. 2 women who worked in that office remembered her visit clear as yesterday because she had graded both their book reports 30-some years ago and told them so. She signed the company's own change form at that conference table, and the office kept a copy and a memorandum of the whole conversation, written the same afternoon. You see what she did. My wife knew that paper signed in sickness draws suspicion the way a wound draws flies, so she signed in daylight, alone, examined, witnessed, and documented, and she left the trail wide and bright on purpose. She built it so that any lawyer who ever came sniffing would find nothing but bedrock everywhere he stepped. Wade's letter called her diminished. The file said in 5 different voices, "Come and see," and the gradebooks answered the other half of the accusation. Undue influence by the family member who controlled her affairs, except here was 4 years of her own hand, showing exactly who had been working her finances, and it was not her husband. $40,000 out, 4 small payments back. And 1 page further on, a thing that turned my stomach and then turned it again. A carbon copy, the old-fashioned kind, of a paper she had made Wade sign the day she wired him the money. My mother's son signed it at her kitchen table, likely never reading past the first line, because he was in a hurry, the way he was always in a hurry. It was a simple promissory note, and under the repayment terms my wife had typed 1 sentence with her own 2 thumbs. This loan, if unpaid, shall be treated as an advance against anything I might otherwise leave to Wade Cutler. An advance against anything I might otherwise leave. She had not cut our son out in secret the way his lawyer told it. She had paid our son early, in his hour of need, with his own signature on the receipt, and he had forgotten the receipt existed. I sat with all of it spread across my kitchen table, and God help me, I laughed once, out loud, alone. Because it was her all over. 45 years that woman graded papers at that table with a red pen, and here at the end, she had graded 1 more, and the last paper she ever marked was Our Boys, and the mark was fair. But the file had 1 page left in it, and this one I did not laugh at. This one still wakes me up some nights. Miss Fuentes, being thorough, had sent for the paperwork around Wade's funeral home dealings, since the assignment attempt was already part of the story, and stapled behind the assignment form Wade had tried to sign was a letter his lender had required of him. A hard money outfit out of Houston, the kind that finances contractors no bank will touch anymore, the kind that holds a man's trucks and equipment over his head. The letter was from Wade, on his pool company's letterhead, promising the lender a large payment by summer's end and giving his assurance of the source. My son had written, in a business letter, that funds were expected shortly from a family life insurance matter, and the date on that letter was 9 days before Dottie died. She was still with us. She was in the hospice bed by the window where she could see Bertie's rain gauge, and I was spooning ice chips, and our son was in Houston promising her life insurance to a lender, with her heart still beating. I want to be careful here because I told you I would be fair to Wade. I do not believe, even now, that my son wished his mother dead. I believe something that in some ways is sadder. I believe he was drowning, and a drowning man does not wish the lifeboat toward him out of malice. But he had stopped seeing his mother as a woman dying and started seeing her as a date on a calendar. And whatever that is, it has to be answered before it can ever be forgiven. Now I knew everything. The question was, what to do with it, and on that, the letter in the gradebook had one more instruction, and it was pure Dottie. She told me exactly who to hand the temper to, so my own hands could stay clean and steady. Her instruction was simple. Take every page of this to Adela, she wrote, and then sit down, old man, and let the paper do the pulling. You've spent your whole life being the strongest thing on the crew. This one time, your job is to be the quietest. So that is what we did. Miss Fuentes wrote the insurance company a calm and complete response on behalf of the trust, and we gathered our documents into 3 tidy sets, and then we did something that I confess did not come natural to me. Nothing. We did not call the cousins to argue our side. We did not answer the talk at church. We let Wade's contest run right ahead down the track it was on. Because here is a thing Miss Fuentes taught me that summer, and it cost my son a great deal not to know it. When you formally contest an insurance beneficiary, and there is real money frozen, the company does not just take your word against a dead woman's paperwork. It sets the money aside and lets the dispute go to the lawyers, and by August, my son's lawyer had filed a suit over the proceeds. And in a lawsuit, there comes a day when the folks making claims sit down across from the other side's lawyers with a court reporter typing every word and answer questions under oath. A deposition, they call it. Wade had demanded a fight with paper he had never seen. All we had to do was show up to the fight he had scheduled. He called me one evening in August, and his voice had honey back in it, and that hurt worse than the anger had. Dad, this has all gotten out of hand. Drop the lawyers, let us split it down the middle like a family, and be done. Half for me, half for whatever month-over-month set up for Bertie. There is fair. And I looked out the window at Bertie, out at the fence line in the gold evening light, tapping her rain gauge with one finger like it owed her something, and I said, Son, you may be right that this has gotten out of hand. Bring whatever papers you have to that meeting in San Antonio, and I will bring mine, and we will settle all of it there, in front of everybody, once and for all. He heard an old man getting tired. He was meant to. He said, that is all I ever wanted, Dad, and he sounded happy, and I sat with that a while after he hung up. There is a particular loneliness in being loved again because a man believes you are about to be useful. I do not recommend it to anybody. I will not pretend the waiting was easy. There were about 3 weeks between that call and the deposition date, and they were long weeks. I kept busy the way my kind keeps busy. I mended 40 feet of fence that did not strictly need mending. I took Bertie to her shifts at Klein's and sat in the lot with the radio on, listening to the ball game, watching her through the glass, telling some rancher's wife to have a blessed day. Saturday mornings, we went to the pancake breakfast at the fire hall like always, and Bertie ate her stack in a spiral, outside edge to center, the way she has since she was knee-high to her mother, and half the volunteer fire department stopped by our table to not mention what everyone was thinking about. And one of those mornings, Deanna called me. My daughter-in-law, first time in weeks. She was quiet a moment, and then she said, Vern, I want you to know the boys miss you. And I said they are welcome at my table any day of their lives, and she was quiet again. And then she said, Wade says Dottie was not herself at the end. I keep thinking about her at Easter, beating all of us at dominoes. And she hung up before I could answer. I have wondered since exactly how much Deanna already suspected and how hard she was working not to know it. You will see soon why I wonder. The night before the deposition, I did not sleep much, and I quit pretending around 4:30 and went and sat in the kitchen in the dark. Her thermos was where it had been since June, untouched, the last thing left in the house exactly as she left it. And I sat there in the dark with my coffee in a plain cup, and I told her about it, the way I'd gotten to doing. I said, Girl, I have strung wire in an ice storm with the whole county black behind me, and I never once had cold hands till tonight. Because here is the truth about being the quietest man on the crew. Tomorrow was not really about insurance money, and it never had been. Tomorrow, either I would watch my son swear falsely against his dead mother and get away with it, or I would watch the paper catch him, and the second thing was righter than the first, and, Lord forgive me, it was going to hurt worse. Miss Fuentes picked me up at 7. I wore my one good suit, the funeral suit, because it is the only suit I own, and I carried one manila envelope with 3 pieces of paper in it that she and I had chosen the way a man chooses his last 3 fence staples. And at 9 o'clock sharp, in a rented conference room 11 floors above San Antonio, with a court reporter cracking her knuckles and a stranger swearing my boy in, we came back Aral Wade, testified for near 2 hours, and he was good, because he was always good. He told the room his mother had been failing for years. He told them I hovered, that I screened her calls, that his parents' lawyer was really his father's lawyer. He painted a picture of a shut-in wife and a gatekeeping husband, and he did it in a golf shirt with his hands open, the honest broker hands he learned selling pools to schoolteachers. There were moments, God is my witness, when it was so smooth I nearly doubted my own 45 years in that house. Then it came our turn, and Miss Fuentes did not raise her voice one time in 90 minutes. She just started laying paper on the table one sheet at a time, like a woman dealing solitaire. The change form first, in Dottie's unmistakable round hand, with the office memorandum of the meeting. Then the 2 witnesses' statements, the ladies whose book report she had graded. Wade's lawyer, a young man with a sharp suit and a folder I noticed was thin, kept his face still through those. Then Dr. Kwan's letter, dated the same morning as the change, 18 years of doctoring behind every line of it. Alert, oriented, entirely capable. The young lawyer read it twice, and the second time his jaw set a little, and he glanced sideways at my son, and it was not a friendly glance. A contested capacity case with a same-day physician letter on the other side as a horse with no legs, and he was finding out mid-race, which meant his client had not told him it existed. His client had not known. Only a woman under a hill in the Garden of Memories had known. Then the grade book. Adela read the loan entries out loud, gentle and level, dates and figures, 4 payments walking away smaller. And I watched my son's tan go gray, because he understood at last where his mother had been standing all those years, and it was at the window, watching, writing the numbers down. Then the carbon of the promissory note, with his signature, and the sentence about the advance against anything she might otherwise leave. The court reporter's little machine clattered on for a second after Adela stopped reading, like even it needed a run-out. Miss Fuentes said quietly, "For the record, the family member who obtained $40,000 from Dorothy Cutler's retirement savings against a signed note repaid a small fraction and contested her competence when the remainder came due as an advance. Would you like a recess?" The young lawyer wanted a recess, but Adela had 1 page left, and she asked to finish. And she laid down the letter from my son to his lender in Houston, promising payment from a family life insurance matter, and she read the date on it. And then she read, from the hospice agency's records, the dates of my wife's final admission, 9 days apart, the wrong direction. Nobody in the room needed the arithmetic done for them. I did not look at Wade when that page went down. I am not made of whatever that would have taken. I looked at Deanna, who had come to sit behind her husband's side and had gotten quieter and quieter behind him all morning. And Deanna was already looking at Wade, and her face was doing something terrible, the face of a woman rebuilding 2 years of her own memories at speed with new information. The missed mortgage payments explained some other way. The truck that went back. The $40,000 she had never once heard of, borrowed from her mother-in-law while Deanna was bringing that same woman's soup on Sundays. She stood up. She said one thing, not loud, and the room let it land. "You told me your mother promised you that money. She promised you. That was the word you used." And she picked up her purse and walked out of the 11th floor and, though I did not know it yet, out of the marriage. Deanna is raising my grandson's new Braunfels now, and she and I get along fine, better than fine, and that is all I will say about another family's road. Wade's lawyer came back from the recess alone and put on the record that his client was withdrawing the contest, fully and finally, with an agreement not to bring it again. The insurance company's man closed his folder with the sound of a door shutting soft. The whole war, from folder on my kitchen table to surrender, had taken 1 summer, and in the end, there was no judge, no jury, no shouting. There was a court reporter, a stack of paper in a dead school teacher's handwriting, and a young lawyer who would not shake his own client's hand in the hallway after. And in that hallway, for one moment, my son stood in front of me with his tie crooked, 17 again around the eyes, and he said, "Dad." Just that, and I want you to know I did not walk past him. I stopped, and I looked at my boy drowning in the open air, and I said, "Son, when you are ready to talk about how you pay your mother back, my table is where it has always been. But you will come to it knowing she was sharper than the whole lot of us to her last morning on this earth. That is the toll on my porch now. Do not come up my steps without it." Then I went home to my daughter and told her the house was hers for life and watched her write the evening's rainfall in her notebook. "A trace," she wrote. It had sprinkled on the highway coming home. She logs a trace as faithfully as a flood. Her mother was the same way, and that, right there, is the whole reason we won. The insurance company paid the Birdie Fund in full before the pecans dropped. The bank in Kerrville holds it, under a judge's shadow, with Dottie's instructions riding along. Already it has bought my daughter new hearing aids, the good kind her coverage would not stretch to, and a proper mattress. And it will go on quietly buying her dignities long after I am a name on a stone next to her mother's. The house is paid off, and it is homestead, and it is staying under our oaks, and Bertie will live in it as long as she wants to, with arrangements made now, on paper, with people answerable to a court, for the day I am not here to see to it. I did not know how to build any of that. I know now. I learned it the way I learned everything, one storm at a time. Wade lost more than the contest. He lost his marriage, and for a while, near as I could tell, himself. The pool business finally went under that winter, and the lender out of Houston took the trucks, and there came a night in February when the phone rang, and it was my son, sounding like a man calling from the bottom of a well, and he said, "Dad, I have been going over it, and I keep getting to the same place." I signed that note. I forgot I signed it because I needed to forget. Everything after that I built on top of the forgetting. That is about as close to the whole truth as Wade has ever stood, and I gave it the respect of not making it easier. I said, "I know, son, now what?" Here is what. In March, an envelope came addressed to the Birdie Fund, care of the bank in Kerrville, with a money order in it for $200, and no note. One has come every month since. Some months, it is 100. June, it was 400, and I happen to know he sold his base boat in June. The bank logs every one against $40,000, and at this rate I will not live to see the paid line, and that is all right. A debt being paid slow and steady by a man working a regular job for the first time in 20 years is not a sad thing to watch. It might be the least sad thing I know. And in April, after a lightning storm chewed up half the county, a truck I did not recognize pulled up my drive, and Wade got out of it in work clothes, with a new ground rod and a clamp from the co-op supply store, and he said, "I noticed your ground wire was rusted through at the base last time I was here. You taught me to check that. Did you quit checking it?" And we drove that rod together, my hands on the clamp and his on the driver, neither of us saying anything worth repeating. And when he left, Bertie stood at the window and watched his truck all the way to the county road and wrote something in her notebook. I did not ask what. Some gauges are hers alone to read. He comes around now, some Saturdays, to the fire hall pancakes. It is not what it was. It may never be what it was. But last month, on a bright, cool morning, I came into the kitchen and found the green thermos washed, dried, and full, sitting by my keys, and 2 cups set out on the counter instead of 1. Bertie had heard his truck before I did. She filled her mother's thermos for her brother without being asked, because in her arithmetic, showing up 3 Saturdays straight means you get coffee. I have decided to trust her arithmetic. She has never once fudged a number in 20 years of notebooks. Now, I promised you at the start that this story had a reason for being told, so let an old lineman leave you with what the weather taught him, and then I will let you go. If somebody you love will always need looking after, do not leave them money in your will and call it love. Money, handed straight to a fragile person, can knock the props right out from under them, benefits and coverage and all. There is a lawful way to leave it so it shelters them instead, and it has to be built ahead of time by somebody who bills them for a living. Sit down with an elder law attorney while your hands are steady and your doctor will vouch for your mind, the way my Dottie did, and put your reasons on paper while nobody can argue with you about them. Remember that on life insurance and pensions and such, the beneficiary form is the whole ballgame, and it beats whatever your will says, so read the form, not your memory of it. And if you ever lend real money to somebody you love, write it down, and both of you sign it. Not because you do not trust them, because paper remembers kindly. Paper remembers without anger, without shame, and without a mother having to say one hard word out loud while she is alive to be argued with. Dottie was our ground wire. I strung line for 38 years, and I will tell you what a ground wire does. It does not shine, and it does not hum, and nobody brags on it. It just stands bolted to the earth, faithful in fair weather. And the one day the sky turns on the house, it takes the whole wild hit quietly and gives it somewhere safe to go. That was my wife. She stood so still and so faithful for 45 years that I mistook her for part of the house. Then the lightning came looking for our daughter, and I found out what had been standing between us and the sky all along. Find your ground wire, check the connection while the weather is clear, and if you have already lost her, like I have, then go be somebody else's. The storm always comes, friends. The ground is what decides what it gets to burn. Thank you for sitting with me this long. Tonight, go check on somebody quiet. The quiet ones are holding up more of the house than you know. Good night from the hill country.